I could do nothing as the fever took him, his body a furnace against the thin straw mattress, his words a broken torrent of names and places that meant nothing to me. He cried out for a woman named Lyra, his voice raw with a grief so profound it fractured the quiet solitude of my cottage. Then came the orders, barked into the darkness, commands meant for men long dead or miles away, his hand gripping a phantom sword at his side. But it was the whisper that finally broke me. He turned his head on the sweat-soaked pillow, his scarred face illuminated by a sliver of moonlight through the window, and his eyes, glazed with delirium, found mine. "Kill me," he rasped, the plea a shard of ice in the stifling heat of the room. "Before he finds me, please." And in that moment, I, who had spent my life healing, was asked to deliver the ultimate mercy to a stranger whose presence felt more dangerous than the wilderness at my door. Wait, before the next revelation unfolds, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected claims, broken bonds, or awakenings under the moon, subscribe and stay close. Now, back to the scene. My fingers, stained with the poultice of comfrey and willow bark I'd been applying to the gash on his side, trembled. "Hush now," I murmured, my voice softer than I intended. "There is no one here but us. You are safe." It was a lie, of course. He wasn't safe, and neither was I. Not since I'd found him collapsed at the edge of the whisperwood, a breath away from bleeding out onto the moss and fallen leaves. He wore the remnants of a soldier's uniform, leather and steel plates slashed and battered, but it was the scent of him that had stopped me cold. Not just the metallic tang of blood, but something else. Pine after a winter storm, ozone before a lightning strike. The scent of a wolf, so powerful and dominant, it made the weak, dormant creature inside me curl into a frightened ball. Bringing him into my home was an act of madness. I was Ilara, the outcast, the hedge witch as the village children called me, the Omega whose wolf had never fully manifested. I survived on the fringes, tolerated only for my knowledge of herbs that could soothe a colicky baby or ease an old man's aching joints. Harboring a wounded soldier, a wolf of his obvious power, was a death sentence. The local pack, led by the brutish Alpha Marcus, would see it as a challenge. Marcus already looked at me with an owner's possessive glare. Finding another male, a powerful one, in my home would be a slight he wouldn't ignore. Yet I couldn't leave him to die. The healer in me, the part that my grandmother had nurtured with stories of ancient pacts between wolves and the forest, was stronger than my fear. So I had dragged him, his massive frame, an almost impossible weight, back to my cottage, a small, one-room hovel of stone and thatch that was both my sanctuary and my prison. For 2 days he had been lost to the fever. I'd forced countless tinctures of feverfew and yarrow between his cracked lips, cleaned his wounds, and stitched the worst of them with a steady hand that belied the frantic beating of my heart. The gash on his side was deep, poisoned by whatever blade had delivered it, but it was the other wounds that spoke of a battle fought with inhuman ferocity. Claw marks raked across his back, and a bite mark on his shoulder was shaped by a jaw far larger than any wolf's I had ever seen. He was a warrior, that much was clear. But who was he fighting? And who was the he that he feared more than death itself? His delirium finally broke on the 3rd morning. I was grinding herbs in a mortar when a floorboard creaked behind me. I turned slowly, my heart leaping into my throat. He was standing, leaning heavily against the wall, his eyes clear for the first time. They were the color of slate, cold and assessing, and they missed nothing. They scanned the small room, the drying herbs hanging from the rafters, the meager collection of pots and pans, the worn blanket on my own small cot, before finally landing on me. There was no gratitude in his gaze, only suspicion. "Where am I?" he demanded, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the floor. "My home," I said, keeping my own voice even. "You were wounded. I found you at the edge of the woods." He pushed himself off the wall, taking a staggered step forward before hissing in pain and clutching his side. The movement pulled his makeshift tunic aside, revealing the neat rows of stitches I'd placed there. His eyes widened slightly in surprise, then narrowed again. "You did this?" I nodded, my hand still holding the pestle. "I am a healer." "A witch," he countered, the word a blade. I flinched, but didn't deny it. It was what they all called me. "I use what the forest provides." He grunted, a sound of reluctant acceptance, and limped towards the single wooden chair by my hearth. He collapsed into it, his body still weak, but his presence filled the tiny cottage, making it feel even smaller. He was immense, a creature of muscle and scars and contained violence. A long, jagged scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, a white line against his sun-darkened skin. His dark hair was shorn close to his scalp, military style. He was nothing like the preening, boastful males of my pack. He was something else entirely, something older and far more dangerous. "I need a name to call you," I said, turning back to my herbs, needing something to do with my hands. He was silent for a long moment. "Kale," he said finally. "Just Kale. No pack name, no title. A name as stark and unyielding as the man himself. I am a Lara." He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the cold ashes in the hearth. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. He was a mystery, a dangerous one, and with every passing moment he spent under my roof, the threat to my fragile existence grew. The scent of him was already sinking into the wooden walls, a claim I hadn't consented to but couldn't erase. Outside, the world was unaware of the storm I had invited in, but they would be. Sooner or later, Marcus would come sniffing around. And when he found the scent of this powerful, unknown alpha clinging to my home, my life on the fringes would be over. It would be a battle for dominance, and I would be caught in the middle, a prize to be broken by the victor. I looked at the man in my chair, at the stark lines of his face, and wondered if I had just saved his life only to sacrifice my own. The days that followed were a tense dance of proximity and silence. Kael was a difficult patient. He was taciturn and demanding, his moods as volatile as the mountain weather. He refused to speak of his past, of the battle that had nearly killed him, or of the enemy he so clearly feared. Any attempt I made to broach the subject was met with a wall of stone, his slate-gray eyes turning cold and distant. He ate the meager broth and bread I provided without complaint, but also without thanks, his focus entirely on regaining his strength. He would push himself through grueling exercises, his jaw tight with pain, until sweat slicked his scarred body and his breath came in ragged gasps. He was a man driven, a weapon honing itself back to a razor's edge. Yet, in the quiet moments, I saw glimpses of someone else. I would catch him watching me as I worked, his gaze intense and unreadable. He observed my hands as I sorted herbs, his eyes tracking the precise, practiced movements. One afternoon, he spoke, his voice startling me from my work. "What is that one for?" he asked, nodding towards the sprig of foxglove I held. "For the heart," I answered, surprised by the question. "It can steady a troubled rhythm, but too much can stop it entirely. It's a flower that demands respect." He grunted, his gaze flickering to my face. "Like you." The observation was so unexpected, so strangely intimate, that I felt a flush creep up my neck. I quickly turned away, my heart hammering against my ribs. No one had ever spoken to me like that. To the pack, I was either an object of scorn or pity. Marcus saw me as a thing to be owned, the villagers as a necessary but unnerving convenience. This man, this stranger, saw respect. As he healed, his true nature became more apparent. The sheer force of his alpha presence was like a physical pressure in the small cottage. It should have terrified me, sent my omega instincts into a submissive panic. Instead, I found a strange comfort in it. It was like living next to a sleeping volcano. The power was immense, but it wasn't directed at me. It was a shield. For the first time in my life, I felt safe in my own home. His scent, that intoxicating mix of pine and winter air, no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a promise. The inevitable confrontation happened a week after Kale's arrival. I had been forced to go into the village for supplies, my small coin purse feeling pitifully light. The journey was always an ordeal. I kept my head down, my cloak pulled tight, ignoring the whispers and suspicious stares of the villagers. As I was leaving the baker's, a hand shot out and grabbed my arm, the grip bruisingly tight. "Well, well, if it isn't the little witch," Marcus sneered. He was flanked by his two usual cronies, hulking betas who mirrored his cruel smirk. Marcus was the alpha's son, handsome in a brutish way, with a sense of entitlement that oozed from his every pore. "You've been scarce, Alara, hiding away in that little shack of yours." "I've been busy, Marcus," I said, trying to pull my arm free. "Let me go." His grip tightened, and he leaned in closer, his scent of wet earth and stale dominance turning my stomach. "I smell something on you, something new." His eyes narrowed, sniffing the air around me like a hound. "An alpha, a powerful one. Who is he? Who have you been hiding in my territory?" "You don't own this territory," I snapped, my fear giving way to a spark of anger. "And I am not hiding anyone." He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Every omega in this valley is mine for the taking, and you are the weakest of them all. You will tell me who he is, or I will tear that hovel of yours apart, stick by stick, until I find him." He began to drag me back towards the forest path, his friends laughing. Panic seized me. I opened my mouth to scream, but before any sound could escape, a shadow fell over us. Kale stood at the edge of the alley, silent and immovable as an ancient oak. He wasn't leaning on anything now. He stood tall, his powerful frame radiating an aura of absolute authority that dwarfed Marcus's brutish posturing. He hadn't shifted. His eyes were still human gray, but the air around him crackled with a predator's promise. Marcus froze, his hand dropping from my arm. His arrogant smirk faltered, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. His wolf, usually so arrogant, was clearly screaming at him to submit. Kale didn't speak. He didn't have to. He simply took a step forward, a low, guttural growl vibrating in his chest. It was not the sound of a simple pack wolf. It was deeper, more primal, a sound that spoke of shattered bones and torn flesh. Marcus's two friends scrambled backward, their eyes wide with terror. Even Marcus, for all his bluster, took an involuntary step back. He was an alpha, but he was staring at an apex predator. There was no comparison. "He is with me," Kale said.
his voice flat and cold as a river stone. The words were not a request or a warning. They were a statement of fact, a law.
Marcus stared, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing he could say, nothing he could do. To challenge Kyle would be suicide. With a final venomous glare in my direction, he turned and stalked away, his cronies scrambling after him. The alley was suddenly quiet. I stood trembling, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving me weak-kneed. Kyle walked towards me, his expression unreadable. He stopped in front of me, his gaze sweeping over my face, then down to the red marks on my arm where Marcus had grabbed me. A muscle feathered in his jaw. Without a word, he gently took my hand, his large, calloused thumbs stroking over the bruised skin. The touch was electric, sending a jolt straight to my core. It was tender, protective, and utterly devastating. In that moment, standing in a filthy alley in a village that hated me, I felt a connection to him so profound it stole my breath. This dangerous, broken soldier had appointed himself my protector, and the most terrifying part was, I was starting to want him to be so much more. The stakes had just been raised. Marcus was humiliated, and a shamed alpha was a vengeful one. Kyle had drawn a line in the sand, placing me firmly on his side of it. I was no longer just the outcast healer. I was now under the protection of a wolf whose power was a mystery. And in the rigid, brutal hierarchy of our world, that made me a target. Life in the cottage shifted after the confrontation. The unspoken tension between us was replaced by a fragile, tentative intimacy. Kyle began to talk, not about the war, but about small things. He told me of the mountains where he was born, of the eagles that nested in the high peaks, their cries echoing in the vast, empty sky. He described the cold, clean air, so different from the damp, cloying atmosphere of the lowlands. He spoke with a quiet longing that made me ache for a place I'd never seen. The stakes had just been raised. Marcus was humiliated, and a shamed alpha was a vengeful one. Kyle had drawn a line in the sand, placing me firmly on his side of it. I was no longer just the outcast healer. I was now under the protection of a wolf whose power was a mystery. And in the rigid, brutal hierarchy of our world, that made me a target. Life in the cottage shifted after the confrontation. The unspoken tension between us was replaced by a fragile, tentative intimacy. Kyle began to talk, not about the war, but about small things. He told me of the mountains where he was born, of the eagles that nested in the high peaks, their cries echoing in the vast, empty sky. He described the cold, clean air, so different from the damp, cloying atmosphere of the lowlands. He spoke with a quiet longing that made me ache for a place I'd never seen. In return, I told him about the forest, about the secret language of the trees, and the healing properties of the smallest flowers. I showed him how to find the sweet, nutty roots of the burdock and which mushrooms were safe to eat. He listened with an intensity that made me feel as if my words were the most important things in the world. He was a quick study, his soldier's mind absorbing and categorizing every piece of information. One evening, as a cool rain pattered against the roof, we sat by the fire, sharing a stew I had made from a rabbit he'd managed to catch. He had insisted on contributing, his pride demanding he not be a complete burden. He was almost fully healed now. His movements were fluid and sure, the last of the poison gone from his system. The power coiled inside him was a palpable thing, a low hum of energy that filled the small room. "You are not like the others," he said suddenly, his eyes on the dancing flames. "The other healers?" I asked. "The other Omegas," he clarified, his gaze shifting to me. "They are taught to be docile, to submit. You fight. You survived out here alone. You faced down Marcus." "I didn't face him down. You did," I reminded him, my cheeks warm. "You stood your ground before I arrived," he insisted. "There is a strength in you, Ilara, a fire. They are fools for not seeing it." His words wrapped around my heart, squeezing it tight. No one had ever seen strength in me. They saw weakness, a flawed wolf, a woman to be used or discarded. Kale saw a fire. As he looked at me, his slate eyes softened, the ever-present guard in them lowering for just a moment. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with pack dynamics and everything to do with the man and woman we were. He leaned forward slightly, his scent of pine and winter enveloping me, and my breath hitched. I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, the deep lines of hardship etched around them. His gaze dropped to my lips, and I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that he was going to kiss me. My own eyes fluttered shut in anticipation. My entire being yearned for his touch, for the validation and connection he offered. The world narrowed to the space between us, to the sound of the rain and the crackle of the fire and the beat of my own traitorous heart. The moment stretched, taut and shimmering with possibility. Then a shout from outside shattered the spell. "Hello, the cottage! We are looking for our commander!" Kale stiffened, every muscle in his body going rigid. The gentle warmth in his eyes was instantly extinguished, replaced by the cold, hard glint of a soldier. He was on his feet in a flash, moving to the door, his body a shield between me and the outside world. I scrambled up, my heart pounding with a new kind of fear. "Stay back," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. Through the single, grimy window, I could see them. At least a dozen figures, all mounted on huge, dark horses. They weren't pack wolves. They wore uniforms of crimson and black, the polished steel of their armor gleaming even in the dim, rainy twilight. They carried themselves with a discipline and lethal grace that made Marcus and his thugs look like clumsy children. These were elite soldiers, and they were looking for their commander. Kale took a deep breath, his shoulders squaring. He looked back at me one last time, his expression a chaotic mix of regret and resignation. Then he opened the door. The man at the front, who wore the insignia of a captain, swung down from his horse. His eyes widened in disbelief and relief as he saw Kale. He immediately dropped to one knee, his head bowed. The other soldiers followed suit as one, a synchronized movement of absolute fealty. "General Kalen," the captain said, his voice ringing with reverence. "We thought we'd lost you. We have been searching for weeks." "General." The word hit me like a physical blow. Not a lieutenant, not a captain, a general. My mind reeled, trying to process the information. The villagers had spoken of him in hushed, terrified whispers. The Wolf General. General Kalen, the Alpha King's right hand, the ruthless commander of the Crimson Guard. They said he had single-handedly torn the throat out of the rebel leader in the Northern Uprising. They said his wolf was not a wolf at all, but a demon pulled from the darkest pits of the earth. They said he leveled entire villages that dared to defy the king, that the rivers ran red in his wake. I stared at the man I had nursed back to health, the man who had seen a fire in me, the man I had almost kissed. The scars on his body were not just from one battle. They were a roadmap of 100 brutal campaigns. The grief in his delirious cries was not just for one woman, but for the countless lives he had taken. The monster they whispered about in the dark was standing on my doorstep, and I had invited him in. I had healed him. I cared for him. A wave of nausea washed over me. The intimacy we had shared felt like a violation. The comfort I had found in his presence curdled into a cold, sickening dread. He wasn't just a powerful alpha. He was a force of nature, a symbol of the brutal regime that kept the territories in a state of perpetual fear. The power imbalance I had sensed was not just between an alpha and an omega. It was between a god of war and a village outcast. I was less than nothing to him, a temporary convenience, a field medic he would forget as soon as he returned to his world of conquest and bloodshed. Kael, General Kalen, turned his head, his eyes finding mine. I could see the plea in them, the desperate attempt to bridge the chasm that had just opened between us. But I couldn't see the man anymore. All I could see was the title, the uniform, the blood. "Get out," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He took a step towards me, his hand outstretched. "Ilara, let me explain." "I healed a monster," I said, my voice gaining strength, fueled by a deep, wrenching sense of betrayal. "I gave comfort to the king's butcher. There is nothing to explain." I backed away, wrapping my arms around myself as if to ward off the chill that had seeped into my bones. "Take your soldiers and go. Leave this place. Leave me alone." Each word was a hammer blow, and I saw them land in the slight flinch of his shoulders, the tightening of his jaw. The captain and the other soldiers were now staring, their expressions a mixture of confusion and hostility directed at me. How dare this lowly woman speak to their general in such a way? To them, I was dirt beneath their boots. And perhaps I was. Kalen's hand dropped to his side. The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a familiar, bleak emptiness. He looked at me for a long, final moment, his gaze sweeping over the small cottage that had been his refuge and my home. Then he turned his back on me. "We ride," he commanded, his voice once again the cold, hard instrument of a general. He swung onto the horse the captain offered him, his movements economical and precise. He didn't look back. The Crimson Guard mounted up, their efficiency terrifying, and spurred their horses into a gallop. They disappeared into the rain-soaked woods, leaving behind only the churned mud and the suffocating scent of ozone and wet pine. The shield I had come to rely on was gone, but the protection it offered had been an illusion. I had mistaken the calm at the eye of the storm for peace. Now the storm had moved on, and I was left in its devastating wake, alone and exposed, with a shattered heart and the chilling knowledge that I had fallen for the most feared wolf in the kingdom. The silence Kalen left behind was a living thing, a heavy, suffocating presence that was far worse than the tense quiet that had preceded it. His scent lingered on the blankets, in the very air I breathed, a constant, painful reminder of my own foolishness. I scrubbed the floors, washed the linens until my knuckles were raw, and burned pungent bundles of sage, desperately trying to erase any trace of him, but it was no use. He had imprinted himself on this place, on me, and no amount of cleaning could wash away the stain of his memory. My fear, which had been dormant under his protection, returned with a vengeance. I was no longer just the village outcast. I was the woman who had harbored the wolf general and then inexplicably sent him away. What would the villagers think? What would Marcus do now that his rival was gone? Humiliation was a powerful motivator for an alpha, and I had been the cause of his public shaming. He would not let that go. I tried to return to my routine, to find solace in the familiar rhythms of my life. I foraged for herbs, my senses on high alert, jumping at every snapped twig and rustle of leaves.
I prepared my remedies, but my hands trembled, and my mind wandered. I saw his face in the dancing flames of the fire, heard his voice in the sigh of the wind through the trees. I had told him to go, and he had obeyed. A part of me screamed in protest at the memory. I had pushed him away, built a wall of righteous anger around my heart, but it was a brittle defense. In the lonely, quiet hours of the night, I had to admit the truth to myself. I missed him. I missed the safety I felt in his presence, the respect in his eyes, the deep rumble of his voice. I missed the man, not the general. But could the two ever be separated? Less than a day later, my fears were realized. I was outside tending to my small herb garden when a shadow fell over me. It was Marcus, and he was not alone. He had brought 4 of his largest pack members with him this time. They spread out, surrounding me, their expressions a mixture of lust and menace.
"Your protector is gone, witch," Marcus sneered, his smile triumphant. "He heard the king's dogs came for him. Seems you were keeping a much bigger wolf than I thought." He stepped closer, circling me like a predator. "You must be something special to catch the eye of the wolf general. I think it's time I found out what that is." "Leave me alone, Marcus," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. I took a step back, but one of his betas blocked my path to the cottage door. "Oh, I don't think so," Marcus said, his eyes darkening. "You embarrassed me. You made me look weak. I'm going to claim what's mine, right here, right now. And these boys are going to watch." Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. This was it, the moment I had dreaded my entire life. I was trapped. There was no one to help me, no powerful alpha to intervene. There was only me. As Marcus lunged for me, something inside me snapped. The years of scorn, of being called weak, of cowering and hiding, it all boiled away in a sudden, searing surge of rage. My fear did not vanish, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, primal instinct to survive. They thought I was a weak, wolfless omega. They were wrong. My grandmother had taught me more than just herbs. She had taught me about the old ways, the wild magic that ran in our bloodline, the magic the pack feared and condemned. It was why they'd cast our family out generations ago. I had never dared to use it, to even acknowledge its existence. It was too dangerous. But now, with my back against the wall, I had no other choice. As Marcus's hands reached for me, I thrust my own palms forward. "Nal Sylvanus!" I screamed, the ancient words feeling foreign and yet perfectly natural on my tongue. A burst of emerald green light erupted from my hands, slamming into Marcus's chest. It threw him backward as if he'd been hit by a charging bull. He landed in a heap 10 feet away, groaning, his face a mask of shocked disbelief. His followers stared, momentarily stunned. I didn't give them time to recover. I channeled the raw, wild energy that was surging through me, a power I never knew I possessed. The soil at my feet churned, and thick, thorny vines erupted from the ground, twisting and writhing like angry serpents. They shot out, wrapping around the beta's legs, pulling them off their feet. They thrashed and cursed, trying to tear at the vines with their claws, but the thorns dug deeper, drawing blood. For a moment, I felt a dizzying rush of power. I was in control. I was not helpless. But the magic was draining, pulling at my life force, and there were still too many of them. Marcus was already staggering to his feet, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury. His shock had given way to a homicidal rage. "You'll pay for that, you filthy witch!" he roared, and this time he began to shift. Bones cracked and reformed, fur sprouted from his skin. His wolf was large and mangy, its eyes burning with malice. He was going to tear me apart. I tried to summon the vines again, but I was exhausted, the magic sputtering within me. I was spent. Just as his transformed shape was about to launch itself at me, a howl split the air. It was a sound I had never heard before, yet my very soul recognized it. It was a sound of absolute command, of ancient power and unrestrained fury. It was not the howl of a pack wolf, it was the howl of a king. From the trees, a blur of motion exploded into the clearing. A wolf, but a wolf of impossible size, a creature from a nightmare. He was immense, easily twice the size of Marcus, his fur the color of midnight, his eyes glowing with an ethereal silver light. It was Kalen. His shift was nothing like the crude, violent transformation of the pack wolves. It was seamless, terrifyingly beautiful, a flow of raw power given form. He hit Marcus's wolf like a thunderbolt, the impact a sickening crunch of bone and flesh. There was no fight. There was only a brutal, efficient dispatching of a threat. Kalen's jaws, powerful enough to snap a tree trunk, closed around Marcus's neck, and he threw the smaller wolf against a tree with contemptuous ease. Marcus landed in a crumpled, whimpering heap, his shift broken, reverting to his human form, bloody and broken. The other betas, who had finally freed themselves from the vines, froze in terror. They stared at the giant direwolf that stood over their defeated leader, a low, menacing growl rumbling in his chest. Then, from the woods behind him, the Crimson Guard emerged, silent and deadly, their swords drawn. Kalen's silver eyes found me. He took a step towards me, the primal fury in his gaze softening as he took in my trembling form. Then he shifted back. The change was just as fluid, the giant wolf seeming to melt away, leaving the man in its place, naked and magnificent, his body taut with power. He didn't look at Marcus or the cowering betas. His eyes were only for me. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. I shook my head, unable to speak. He walked past me and stood over the whimpering Marcus. He looked down at the Alpha Sun, his expression one of utter disdain. He could have killed him with a single blow. Instead, he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "This territory is under my protection now," he declared, his voice ringing through the clearing. "She is under my protection. You will leave this valley and never return. If I ever see your face again, I will tear you apart with my bare hands. This is my only warning." He then looked at the other pack members. "This is your only chance to declare for a new alpha, for me, or you can follow him into exile." The betas didn't hesitate. They fell to their knees, bowing their heads in submission to the new, undeniable power that had claimed their territory. Kalen turned his back on them, his dismissal complete. He walked back to me, his eyes searching my face. The world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us in the clearing. The terrifying general, the primal wolf, the wounded soldier, they were all parts of him. But the man who stood before me now was someone else entirely. He was vulnerable. "I came back," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I couldn't stay away." "Why?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. "Because my life as a general meant nothing if it cost me you," he said, his honesty a raw, open wound. "I am a weapon, Elara, a tool for the king. I have been for a long time. But with you, I felt like a man again, A wolf, not just a monster. He reached out, his hand hesitating before gently cupping my cheek. His touch was warm, grounding. What I saw just now, your power, you are no Omega. You are something more, something magnificent. He wasn't claiming me out of dominance or duty. He was laying himself bare, offering all the broken, dangerous pieces of himself and asking if I could accept them. He saw my power not as a threat, but as something beautiful. Tears streamed down my face, tears of relief, of fear, of a love I had tried so desperately to deny. The walls around my heart crumbled into dust. I saw him then, not the wolf general, not the king's butcher, but Kalen, the man who saw a fire in me when everyone else saw only shadows. I leaned into his touch, my hands coming up to rest on his bare chest, over the steady, powerful beat of his heart. Kalen, I whispered, saying his full name for the first time. I claim you, Elara, he said, his voice thick with an emotion that mirrored my own. Not as a general claims territory, but as a wolf claims his mate. If you will have me? In answer, I rose on my toes and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision, a desperate, hungry confirmation of a bond that had been forged in fever and blood, secrecy and fear. It was the taste of pine and winter, of steel and magic, of two broken souls finding their whole in each other. In the heart of my forest, surrounded by defeated enemies and loyal soldiers, I was no longer an outcast. I was claimed, and I had claimed him right back. The aftermath was a whirlwind of change. Kalen, with the unyielding efficiency of a seasoned commander, solidified his control over the territory. The local pack, leaderless and terrified after Marcus's exile, swore fealty to him without hesitation. They looked at him with awe and fear, and at me with a new, dawning respect that was utterly foreign. I was no longer Elara the hedge witch. I was the general's mate, their Luna. The transition was dizzying. Women who once sneered at me now bowed their heads in deference. Men who had seen me as prey now avoided my gaze, their fear of Kalen a palpable shield around me. Kalen sent a rider to the capital with a message for the Alpha King. It was not a resignation, he explained to me one evening as we sat on the porch of my cottage, but a renegotiation. His wolf had found its mate, his heart its anchor. He would continue to serve, to protect the kingdom's borders, but his place was here, with me. He would govern this territory, turning it from a neglected backwater into a bastion of strength and justice. He would no longer be just the king's sword. He would be a lord in his own right, with his own people to protect. It was a bold, unprecedented move, a demand rather than a request. But Kalen had the power and the loyalty of the elite Crimson Guard to see it through. Our home remained the small cottage. He refused my offer to move to the larger Alpha's house in the village. "This is where I healed," he'd said, his hand covering mine. "This is where I found you. It is the only home I want." His soldiers, the formidable Crimson Guard, made a permanent camp in a hidden meadow nearby. They became a silent, watchful presence, their crimson cloaks occasionally visible through the trees. They were Kalen's instruments of war, but they were also fiercely loyal to him and, by extension, to me. Their captain, a stern man named Bors, began consulting me on supplies, his respect genuine. My knowledge of the forest and its resources was now a strategic asset. My magic, which I had hidden my entire life, was now celebrated. Kalen encouraged me to practice it, to explore the depths of a power I was only just beginning to understand. I was no longer just a healer of bodies. I was becoming a guardian of our new, growing community. But the most profound change was between us. The titles, General, Luna, faded away when we were alone. He was Kalen and I was Alara. We learned each other's scars, both visible and invisible. He told me of the campaigns, of the difficult choices and the heavy burden of command. He spoke of Lyra, his first love, a soldier who had died in his arms during a brutal ambush years ago. The same ambush that had left him with the scars on his face and a deep-seated mistrust of everyone around him. He confessed that the enemy he feared in his delirium was not a person, but the monster he was afraid of becoming, the cold, unfeeling general with nothing left to lose. In turn, I told him of my loneliness, of the ache of being an outcast, of the shame I'd felt for my weak wolf, and the secret terror of my magic. He would listen, his powerful body a warm, solid presence next to me, and his touch would soothe the old wounds that no poultice could heal. He loved my strength, the fire he had seen in me from the beginning, and he cherished my healer's spirit. He made me believe I was not flawed, but rare. One crisp autumn evening, we stood on the porch, looking out as the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. A cool breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Kalen wrapped his arms around me from behind, pulling me back against his chest. I leaned my head back against his shoulder, my hand covering his where it rested on my stomach. "The king has agreed to my terms," he murmured into my hair. "This land is ours." Ours. The word was simple, but it held the weight of a new world. A world where we belonged, where we were safe. A world we would build together. I turned in his arms to face him, my hands framing his scarred, handsome face. The coldness was gone from his slate-gray eyes, replaced by a deep, unwavering warmth that was reserved only for me. "I was so afraid of you," I confessed, my voice soft. "I know," he said, his thumb gently stroking my cheek. "I was afraid of myself. You saved me, Alara, not just from the poison in my blood, but from the poison in my soul." He lowered his head and kissed me, a slow, tender kiss, full of promises for the future and gratitude for the past. The world outside, with its politics and its dangers, still existed. There would be more battles, more challenges to face. But here, in his arms, with the scent of pine and winter snow enveloping me, I was home. I looked past his shoulder at the wild, ancient forest that had once been my only companion, and I smiled. I had taken in a wounded soldier, a man shrouded in mystery and danger, and in healing him, I had healed myself. The feared wolf general had found his heart, and the outcast witch had found her king. Together, we would face whatever came next, our bond the strongest shield of all.